When the global world order fractures, when shipping breaks down, when wars return, and when governments clamp down on their citizens, where do you go? Most people think of Switzerland or New Zealand as the perfect plan B bolt holes. But the true geopolitical safe space may be somewhere else entirely, the southern cone of South America. In this video, we'll explore how the US-led world order is ending, what that means for global security and trade, and why the Southern Cone, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, and Paraguay, offers something almost no other region can: food and fuel security, practical freedom thanks to weak states, and an unusually accessible path to residency and citizenship. By the end of this video, you'll see why this region is the best place to be if the world unravels. After World War II, the United States emerged dominant, holding most of the world's gold, its choicest military bases, and a navy more powerful than all the others combined. Europe and Japan lay in ruins. Only one rival remained: the Soviet Union. What followed was a global competition for allies. The US made an offer: side with us, and you get tariff-free access to the world's largest consumer market, guaranteed shipping to that market, courtesy of the US Navy, and military protection. In exchange, America ran a permanent trade deficit. The strategy worked beyond expectations. Former enemies, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, became allies. Communist China became America's largest trading partner, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. For 7 decades, U.S. naval power enabled global supply chains and worldwide trade. Anyone could trade with anyone. Countries specialized economically without worrying about defense. China's export-led economy became possible. But the global order of peaceful growth we've enjoyed since the end of the Cold War is a historic anomaly. That era is ending, not just because America can't afford to maintain the order anymore, but because it no longer wants to. The Midwest produces enough calories to feed the country twice over. And following the shale revolution in the 2010s, it's also now energy independent. The United States, in fact, is a net energy exporter, and foreign trade accounts for just 23% of the US GDP. American voters, exhausted by Iraq and Afghanistan, now vehemently oppose foreign entanglements. The government won't subsidize global shipping safety anymore. The U.S. military retrenchment is underway. For the rest of the world, the implications are stark. Old rivalries will resurface: India and Pakistan, Armenia and Turkey, Japan and China. Germany is rearming. History is returning, but not to the southern cone of South America. In 1823, President Monroe declared the Americas off limits to European powers. Any old world intervention in the New World would be treated as a threat to American security. Through organizations like the OAS and the Rio Pact, this doctrine has since become formal policy. American military security means South American military security too. No external power, not Russia, not China, and certainly not Spain, can threaten countries in the Western Hemisphere without intervention from the world's greatest military power. For investor migrants with a foothold in the Americas, this guarantees freedom from external military aggression. The 20 bloodiest wars of the last 300 years killed some 210 million people. Only one of those wars took place in South America: the War of the Triple Alliance, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil against Paraguay. That conflict took 500,000 lives, which is a lot in absolute numbers, but it's only 0.25% of the global number of war deaths in the last 300 years. It took place more than 150 years ago, and it's not likely to resurface anytime soon, if ever. Whereas Europe and Asia have lots of extensive plains over which armies can easily march. Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Poland all sit on the northern European plain, which is why those areas have been corridors for invasion hundreds of times throughout European history. South America's geography is far less conducive to mutual invasions. Soaring mountains, dense tropical rainforests, and high-altitude deserts make wars between two South American countries far more difficult and much more expensive than wars between, for example, Germany and Russia or between India and Pakistan. Chile and Argentina, for example, virtually can't invade each other. The Andes Mountains separate the two countries, and only a handful of mountain passes enable a way through for an invading army, almost all of which are impassable in winter. Latin America is also a place of enormous distances, precluding the possibility of any surprise invasions. So, whereas Germany may catch Belgium off guard with a rapidly organized blitzkrieg, the Bolivians would have to be entirely asleep at the wheel not to have weeks of prep time for a land-based invasion by Brazil, for example. But even if invasions within Latin America were feasible, two additional factors make them an extremely unlikely event. First, the Americans are unlikely to stand idly by and let a war take place in their backyard. Second, most countries in the region simply don't have the kind of capital or infrastructure required to wage a full-scale war. Nor do they have the armies or equipment. Remember that the American-led world order allowed these countries to freeload off American military spending, not needing to invest much in their own military capacity. Much of what passes for armies in Latin America today are essentially instruments of domestic control rather than meant for protection from external threats. And here we come to an overlooked but important point, the paradox of freedom in the Southern Cone. Because on paper, these governments are often statist, often left-leaning, and prone to regulation. But in practice, their weakness means enforcement is inconsistent. Rules bend, informality dominates, parallel systems flourish. The result is that daily life often feels freer than in the supposedly liberal democracies of Europe or North America, where governments have both the will and the means to tax, monitor, and regulate aggressively. In the Southern Cone, governments may legislate, but they struggle to enforce, and that gap is a form of liberty. In the globalized American-led order, countries did not need to worry about food self-sufficiency. Since they could export to and import from anywhere, they could engage in the kind of market specialization that would have made David Ricardo proud. Liberated from the need to maintain a domestic food supply, each country could focus on making what they could produce more efficiently than others. Japan could manufacture cars and high-end electronics. Malaysia could convert its rice paddies to palm oil fields. And this state of affairs is what allowed a totally barren country like Saudi Arabia to support a population of 36 million and have one of the world's highest rates of obesity. But if global ocean-based supply chains are no longer guaranteed by the US Navy and therefore become unsafe, that is to say far more expensive, a long list of countries are going to struggle to feed their populations. For the same reasons, they're also going to struggle to fuel themselves, unless, of course, they have a navy with long-distance projection power that can physically ensure the delivery of goods. But that makes for a depressingly short list of countries. Beyond the United States, countries that have the naval capacity to escort their own cargo ships from, say, inside the Strait of Hormuz, where China, for instance, gets more than 80% of its oil, include Britain, France, and Japan, and that's about it. The rest are going to have to rely on good trade and military relationships with the great naval powers to make sure food and fuel from the outside can reach their shores. South America will largely be spared the coming disruptions to global shipping, at least within their own hemisphere, thanks to the Monroe Doctrine. But Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia will not. Now, some are going to say, what about New Zealand? Isn't that the ultimate bolt hole? Well, certainly, New Zealand is peaceful and produces more food than it consumes. But its remoteness is a double-edged sword. In a world of disrupted trade, New Zealand's isolation means it depends on long, vulnerable shipping lanes for almost everything except food, such as manufactured goods, fuel, and machinery. And scale matters too. New Zealand has only 5 million people. The Southern Cone has more than 70 million. And that's enough to sustain real industries, defend itself if necessary, and remain vibrant even in isolation. Geopolitically, New Zealand sits within reach of Asia's flashpoints. The Southern Cone, by contrast, is buffered by oceans, jungles, deserts, mountains, and sits firmly under America's Monroe Doctrine security umbrella. And then there's immigration. New Zealand is a pretty hard country to enter. Residency and citizenship are tightly restricted, and A lot of the time, they're tied to investment. But in the southern cone, by contrast, residency is available to anyone who can show a modest regular income. And citizenship is attainable quickly by global standards. You can do normal naturalization in as little as 2 years in Argentina, 3 years in Paraguay and Uruguay, and 5 in Chile. So while New Zealand may look safe on paper, the Southern Cone not only offers abundance and security, it actually lets you become part of it. Another sound reason to keep at least one foot in the Southern Cone is that this region has a variety of low tax jurisdictions and flexible fiscal regimes. Uruguay, for example, offers tax exemptions for foreign income under certain residency setups. Paraguay is famous for its territorial taxation and low effective rates. Even Argentina and Chile, they have higher nominal taxes, often fall short on enforcement, meaning residents can, in practice, structure their affairs to be far more lightly taxed than in Europe or North America. The lesson is simple. Tax laws change suddenly, and governments around the world are becoming more aggressive. Having a foothold in the Southern Cone gives you optionality, the ability to shift your tax residency quickly should your home country turn hostile. The Southern Cone has no shortage of high-quality residency and citizenship opportunities. It offers independent means visas requiring nothing more than proof of modest income, accessible naturalization timelines of 2 to 5 years, golden visas and investment routes with thresholds far lower than those in Europe. If you take a step back, the Southern Cone combines geography that makes war nearly impossible, surplus food and secure energy, weak states that create room for freedom, accessible residency and citizenship, and flexible low-tax options. The Southern Cone is not just another option. This is the world's last structural safe space in an age of disorder. You may not have thought of Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, or Paraguay as your hedge against global chaos, but the logic is clear. If the world is going to unravel, this is where you want to be.